Honestly, it's a job.
I'm glad to see so many wonderful people here. It was a real surprise. I have to begin by apologizing. I guess we don't quite have enough packets. We had about 20 pre-registrants, so we thought, well, we'll be really optimistic and we'll figure we might get 40 people. But we seem to have more than that, so we're just delighted to see all you people here. Glad to see you survived Friday the 13th. My name is Nancy Maxon, and I'm president of the Missoula League of Women Voters. And welcome to Lobbying ABCs. Some of you may not be familiar with the League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan organization. And this year, the Missoula League is celebrating its 40th anniversary. In 1994, the League of Women Voters US will be celebrating its 75th anniversary. And for all those many years, a central principle for the League has always been voter registration and voter education. This program today is a voter education program. You may be familiar with some of our other voter education programs. Usually they take the form of a candidates forum or a debate on issues. But this year, the candidates were doing a very good job of confronting the issues and debating each other face to face. So we put our voter education energy into a different program. We decided to look at what happens after you cast your votes, and how could we help you as voters become more active participants in the political system once you have completed voting. So the logical place for that, with the legislative session coming up in Helena in January, was to look at how we could help you get your point across, express your views at that legislative session. Hence, we decided on doing a fundamental workshop on lobbying, teaching the basics, the ABCs. And we've enlisted the help of 3 experts. Harry Fritz is not here yet, we're waiting for him, who will help us with this process. But I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker this morning, and this is Earl Laurie, and we're delighted to have Earl here. He is a veteran of 7 legislative sessions. That's 14 years in the legislature. He served from 1975 to 1989. And his primary committees were the Judiciary Committee, the Education Committee, and Appropriations, the all-important committee. So Earl, I'll turn the floor over to you and let you begin our presentations.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to start my presentation back behind a little before the lobbying takes place and talk very briefly about how you get bills and so forth into the legislature so you understand some of the process. The legislature, the only one who can put a bill into the legislature is the legislator. That is the first thing. You cannot put a bill in, the governor cannot put a bill in, the Department of Fish and the Wildlife cannot put a bill in. The only one that can introduce a bill is a member of the legislature. So if any group wants to start action to get a bill in the legislature, that's where you start. If you can't get a legislature to take your bill into the legislature, well, you're dead in the water right there and you're out. So I want to talk about for you something about how you go about that, and you can ask more questions. If you want a bill done, then your problem is, don't worry about drawing up the bill. The first thing you have to think about is what I want to do. Secondly, who's going to get it into the legislature? And there's a sort of a priority that sets up, I would suggest that you follow, because you're not going to get everybody introduced just by walking up and saying, Mr. Smith, I want this introduced. He's going to probably say, well, yes, and then no, a typical political position to take by any member of the legislature. And from then on you go. So what you want to do is to get your best thing. And a sort of a priority is this way. Number one priority, if you know a legislature from your hometown, your own district, and he's the same party as you have, and if you contribute to his or her campaign, obviously you've got an in, because the legislature will feel some responsibility towards you. That's perfectly all right, but it also helps if you know the person. So the first person you think of getting a bill, either whether you're in an individual or a group, is to talk to either the Senate or the a member of the House. That's immaterial because they can be introduced in either place. Just talk to him and say, this is what I want to do. I want to get rid of daylight savings, which I think took the place of the bill in the last session, or anything else. Now, you don't have to have the bill drawn up in great detail when you talk to that legislature. All you need to talk to him is what you want to do and why you want to do it. Many people think they have to present a bill or something. That's not necessary. All you need to do is have an idea that you think ought to be done and how you want to do it. That's the first priority. If you can get him and he or she, now I'll use this, he maybe as a generator, not a generation. But if they have bills that are going on, then the next thing, who do I go to next? If I get turned down there or unable, for some reason, he or she is unable to do it. The next one will be someone in the district, if not in the district, in your town that you know. If you know a person, that's a great plus because he knows you, you know that, and then so you have that. So if your district or senator or member of the House can't do it or won't do it, then pick somebody who's in the town. And maybe across town or anywhere. And again, if you know that person, that's a great plus because you get a one-to-one conversation on it. It is always better to have a group present a bill than a single individual because you have the weight of more than one person. So a group or an organization has a greater chance of getting a bill introduced than a single individual. If you can't find anyone in your hometown, take you into the state and look at the legislators. The next thing I would do if I struck out so far, I would look at the previous members of the legislature and try to find a legislator who is interested in that particular subject. You can tell that by going back and looking at the committee assignments of the particular legislators. If you're a hunting enthusiast and you want to change the hunting rule, don't look for a legislator that's on the taxation committee because you won't get anywhere. He or she doesn't know anything about it. You look for a member of the Fish and Wildlife Committee, which will have an interest. It's always a plus because he or she is interested in the same subject you want. So look through that and see if you can find someone who has been on a committee. That in the kind of the order is the thing that you ought to do. Now, you may find the legislators are somewhat reticent about introducing a bill, particularly some of the old-timers, because they've been burned by a bill. And I've been badly burned, and I expect every member has, by introducing a bill that later he wished was dead. And I had to work. I must admit, I worked very hard to kill a couple of bills that I introduced over the years. But there is one thing that you have to understand. The number of bills introduced in the legislature is tremendous. And there are far too many. Every session there's a big cry, how are we going to limit it? I picked out just in a hurriedly this morning back to the 1985 session, since that was the first legislative report that I could pick up. In the 1985 session, the House introduced 1,027 bills and the Senate introduced 576 for a total of 1,547 bills. Now obviously, they're not going to take, in 90 days, no legislator is going to take care of that number of bills. That particular session of the 1985, only 526 of the 1,000 in the House were passed and 310 of the 570 in the Senate were passed. Those did not all make the grade because it was a veto by the governor of several of them. But so there are always too many bills, and that means that the legislature is a little wary about introducing bills willy-nilly. Secondly, in an effort to cut down the bills, the legislature has made a rule that I think is still in effect. I got fired by my constituents in '88, so I have to say that, talk about some past things. After the opening of the legislature, each member of the legislature may introduce only 5 bills. I think that's still true, isn't it, baby? So only 5 bills. That does not hold for pre-introduced bills between now and the time the legislature opens. After that, if a bill is to be introduced, the member of the legislature has to go to the particular house he's in and ask for permission to introduce an additional bill, and that requires a majority vote of all those members of that house, and is difficult to get unless there's some very important reason. That limitation does not go with appropriation bills and revenue bills. Those are outside of themselves. But each legislator legislator can only introduce 5 bills at the open session. So he or she has to be somewhat careful because there may be some important bills come up which you would like to do. Now, if you see bills in the legislature, you might find that there are many people have signed on as introducing or supporting the bill. That is a method by which a legislator hopes to get increased support for a certain bill. It's not required. Only one person has to sign a bill to get it introduced. And they introduce it. After, let's go just a little farther and say, well, you finally convinced Mr. Smith, who's the representative from X county or X district, to introduce the bill. What happens then? Then it's up to the legislator to do that. Before 1957, if I can go back just a little, the only way you could get a bill written was to either get a lawyer, but the thing you usually got to write it was a lobbyist. And the Congress of Montana Power, because there was no one would write a bill except yourself or a lawyer or those people. So bills were introduced. In 1957, the legislature took a very important step. They created the Legislative Council. Now, the Legislative Council has a great number of things that it looks over. It's the administrative arm of the legislature. But one of the most important sections that they have is the bill writing section. So a legislator that decides he wants a bill written, he goes down to the Legislative Council and they hand him a sheet, which is a sheet for the introduction of a bill. On that he writes what he wants to do. In essence, he writes, I want to kill daylight savings. He thinks that's ungodly and so on and so on. There are a group of, 20-some lawyers in the bill writing section of the Legislative Council, and they are the ones that draw up the bill. It's not necessary for a person who wants to introduce a bill to have a bill written up. It's not necessary for the legislator to write up the bill. That is done by a group which are they're practically all attorneys. And they write up the bill and put it in the proper form. They'll also do some research on the bill, see if it's constitutional, see if there's something that can't be done, or they don't ask if it shouldn't be done, or there would be a lot of bills not introduced. They write it up. When they have written it up, they take it back to the legislator, and he looks it over, sees if there's any changes he wants, and it's done what he has asked him to do. If that bill, he signs off on the bill, then it is introduced in the particular house where it is, and it enters the regular procedure of going through it. I'm not going to talk about the lobbying. I think experts are going to speak more to that. Once the bill is in there, it has to go 3 readings. Now, very briefly, undergo that. The first reading is the introduction of the bill. The second reading is it's referred to a committee and the various committees. If it's a fish and game bill, it goes to the fish and game. If it's a bill changing some law, it goes to the judiciary. If it's an education bill, it goes to the education. There are about 15 committees in the House. They are referred to those by the Speaker. The Speaker is the one that controls the bill. And you might want it in education, but it may not go there because the Speaker may decide where it goes. If he wants to kill it, he sends it to a bill. A little aside. Years ago, we had the Agricultural Committee, which is headed by a representative from near Broadus, called the Range and Agricultural Committee. And it killed all the bills that came into it. That was their purpose. That does not exist now. So but they got famous for the years before on the Agriculture Committee. Everything that wanted to be killed went to the Agriculture Committee, and Mr. Smith killed them all. In the 77 election, we gave him a green light bulb during the session because he thought he didn't know what the green light bulb looked like. He never voted for anything. Well, that's a the committee has a hearing, and that's where the lobbying comes in, and the presentation, and that's going to be governed by other people today. That is known after the committee hears the bill, and there's testimony both for and against, and all of that. The committee votes pass or do not pass, usually. That recommendation then goes to the branch of the legislature, the Senate or the House, in which that committee bill was introduced, in which committee here. And it comes up before let me use the House, I was a member of the House. It comes up before the House for argument. You know, everybody has a chance. The bill is brought up and the sponsor stands up first and explains the bill, and then the people for it and against it. That is where the real discussion takes place, in this, which is called the second reading. And that is before the full body of that particular Senate or the House. After that discussion, there's a great deal, and maybe a great deal of discussion. After that discussion, there are several things that can happen. What usually happens is that a vote comes up, pass or do not pass. If the bill is passed, then it goes on for further action. If the bill does not pass, kaput. But it may not die that death at that moment. The sponsor of the bill may try to save it by referring it back to the committee, and that if he can get the House or Senate to do that, that holds the bill, keeps the bill, and he can send it back to committee for further consideration and hope he can get it through. If the bill is marked or do pass by a majority of those present voting, it goes on to what we call third reading. That argument in the House is the second reading. Next, it comes up before either the Senate or the House where the bill is for the third reading. At the third reading, a vote again is taken, pass or do not pass. But at the third reading, there is no discussion allowed. The discussion must all take place in the second reading. At the third reading, you merely vote pass or do not. You vote a red button or a green button. For green button if you want it to pass. If the bill passes on third reading, it's still alive and then is transferred to the other house to go through that same procedure. It must go through both. If it gets a majority of red lights, do not pass, the bill is dead. Now that very briefly is the process that a bill goes through. If it passes third reading, then it goes to the governor. Eventually is inscribed and goes on to the governor for his signature. The governor may do three things. The governor may sign it and the bill becomes law. He may veto it and then he returns it to the House which originated it, and then the particular House or the legislature can attempt to override the governor's veto by a 2/3 vote if they wish to and are able to. He also may, in the Montana legislature, may return it with an administrative veto, which means certain sections he wants corrected. He hasn't vetoed the bill, but he doesn't. It's vetoed as it is, but he has suggested a change, which implies that if that change is made, he will pass the bill. So he goes back to the House again, goes through that process of both houses. If they agree with the governor's suggestion of changes in the bill, then it goes back to the governor and it is signed usually. If they do not agree with the changes, they again can pass the bill. The governor can veto it again and the bill is dead. Now that's very rapidly what goes through for what's happened to a bill as it goes through the House. Where the public have input is first putting in the bill. That is, the general public have input in the legislature by putting in a bill and asking for it and getting it introduced. They have the second input when the bill is referred to the committee. That is where the people have a chance to testify, come in before the committee and either support or oppose the bill. That is where the lobbying is, let me say official lobbying is done. There's a lot of lobbying done outside, of course. But where you have a chance to talk to and get up before the committee and support a bill or oppose the bill is in the second reading before the committee. When it goes to the House or the Senate for the second reading, no one may speak but the legislator. The public is not allowed to speak at that time before the legislator, just the legislator. So your lobbying has to be, to get a bill passed, is outside or during the committee hearing. Those are the only two places where you are able to testify before a committee. The question comes, what about if a bill has some financial thing? Should I suggest ways? Well, I guess I could say and predict if it has a great financial fiscal responsibility in the present strained conditions of the legislature, forget it. You may not get it. It's worth trying, but you probably won't get it. I'm not sure that you need to work out in detail any fiscal. You might suggest ways, but that is a very complicated. It must intertwine with everything else. I think if I were introducing a bill that had a fiscal responsibility, I would talk to my legislature, but I wouldn't try and suggest ways to do it, to support it. I would show him that the necessity of the bill, even though it has a fiscal note with it, because tying that in with all the other needs of the state in the way of fiscal and taxation and the rest, unless you have a very good idea, I would forget it. That's just my advice. Take your own chance on it. I don't think it's necessary to work in great detail the fiscal responsibility. The main thing is to convince somebody to get the bill in. That is a very, very brief overview of what is of the progress of the bill through the legislature. I don't know whether that's helpful. I would begin. I'm going to quit there and see if there are any questions.
Earl, are there committee hearings again after it's gone through the House, the first 3 readings, and goes over to the Senate? Are there also committee meetings in the Senate?
The process is not a very efficient process, it doesn't seem, because let me introduce the bill in the House. It goes through that committee hearing, goes through second reading, is passed on third reading, and is referred to the Senate, and the Senate goes through exactly the same procedure. The Senate will hold committee hearings on the bill, will have a second reading and a third reading, and send it on. Yes, that is one of the difficulties if you're lobbying. You go and lobby at the House, or the building in the House, and you go and testify, and they pass it, and it looks all hunky-dory. Don't forget that you're only 50% there. And being a House member, I'll say the Senate is a dirty bunch of boys, because they don't care.
You can say that without Harry here.
Yeah, Harry isn't here, so we used to say that the Senate we could send the Lord's Prayer of the Senate, and they'd change it, put on amendments, and then kill it. Did you have questions?
Earl, if you doesn't find someone to carry your bill, for example, in the House, should you also contact somebody in the Senate who would kind of shepherd that bill through that body?
You may suggest that. If you get a member of the House to sign the bill, it is not necessary to get somebody to sign it for the Senate. That introduces it. But what he may do, if he's particularly interested, he'll go over to the Senate and try and get somebody to carry the bill. Somebody has to present the bill before the committee and before the Senate. Now, you may suggest somebody if you have somebody that you know is particularly interested in. If not, a member of the House will probably go over and find some pal who will introduce it. It isn't absolutely necessary. It's helpful. You may see a bill that has anywhere from 10 to 100 signatures on it of other sponsors. That is a common process in the legislature to get other people to sign the bill. It adds weight to the bill. If I introduce the bill and Earl Laurie is the only signatory on it, or only introducer, why, of course, it's maybe looked with considerable suspicion. While if I have 25 other members of the House to sign it, it adds weight to it. It's not required, but it's helpful. I've seen bills go through that had only one signer, and I've seen bills with 20 go down, but it is helpful. That probably is more due to up to the member of the House. That's not, as you're trying to get a bill in, it's not particularly your job. That's more up to the member who you get to agree to introduce the bill. If he feels they're necessary, or he'll get more signatories on it. And he'll probably go to the Senate and try and get both Senate and House signatures. So that helps the bill go through.
I had a question.
Yeah.
If I wanted you to write a bill for me, what kind of information would you like for me to help you?
It's really very simple, because of the fact that the Legislative Council will write the bill. All you need to do is go to a legislator that says, I want to forbid them from raising pigs in Bonner Park. I want to forbid them to raise pigs in Bonner Park. And that's really all you need to do.
So I don't need to provide any justification?
No, you have to sell him. It's a selling job. You've got to sell he or she the bill that he will introduce or she will introduce. So it's a little more than that. But as far as writing the bill, no. As far as presenting the bill written up, it's a waste of time because it'll go to the Legislative Council to be written anyway. So that's not necessary. All you need to do is to get a legislator, go to him or her, and sell them or get them to introduce the bill. From that on, it's done by the legislative council, which is a great saving of time. Because most the bills writing a bill is a very complicated procedure to make sure that the language is just proper and everything else. And that now is the function of the legislative council. They're all attorneys down there. There's 20 of them sit down there by the hour, 18 hours a day during the session, writing bills. And they will get it. And once in a while they blow one too, but rarely.
You mentioned that there's pre-introduced bills
Yes.
before the session. How do we go about getting that or getting that information
Now,
so that we can monitor?
If you have a senator who is not running for election, there are two classes we get. A senator who is not running for election is a member of the legislature.
Right.
If I'm running for the House, say, and haven't been elected, I'm not a member of the legislature. But once the election day goes, even a person who has not served in the legislature or a person who is re-elected then may introduce bills in that time from the first Tuesday in November till January when the legislature opens. Those are pre-session bills. They go through pretty much the same way. That either the elected person or a person coming to the legislature may go down and ask for bills to be drawn up.
Right. What my question is, though, is that, for instance, I want to do some monitoring of the legislature to see what kind of bills are being introduced in case they might affect my group.
Yes.
And so what I'm interested in is finding out how I can gain access to those before the legislative session starts so I can read them to see if any of those bills affect my group.
You probably won't get to read them because they probably won't be done. But you can find out what pre-session bills have been asked to be written. The reason that you won't get to read them is that they probably aren't drawn up till after the session starts because there's a sudden load. The second Tuesday in November, you're not a member of the legislature. The day after you won the election, you are a member. You can introduce bills. So there's a big flood of bills go in there right away in November and December. And the council does not have time to draw those up. Those bills probably won't come out too much later during the session. You can find from the council, though, what bills have been asked to be drawn.
Okay, so just call the legislative council and ask them.
Check the legislative council.
And then I know many people who are monitoring that list do contact the sponsor and just to find out in general terms about what kind of bill it is that they're doing. Even though the bill might not be introduced, it's public knowledge if that's a bill draft. It's in the process.
Yes. Once that request for bill drafting is signed, it's public information. You can get it from the council anytime you want. They probably won't give you anything but the title because of the delay. It's a job. In fact, bills that have been introduced in the legislature may not come out for weeks, partly because of the fact. Now there is a limitation on the time that a bill may be introduced. I think this holds at the Health and I was last there. But bills may be introduced only through in the first 10 days of the legislature. There's a limitation. Of course, you've got to set it up so it goes through it. But if you want information, I may be covered later, but if you want information about where a bill is and that information is available. It may take a little bit of digging to get it, but you can always get it. One thing that the Constitution is very emphatic about, if you've read the Montana Constitution, that is, the government must be open. The government cannot be closed, as you are probably aware. Committees may not be closed, even the school board, except for certain exceptions. So that information is available. It takes a little work to get it. During the session, there is a person always there who you can call, a number that you can call and ask about a particular bill. Is it coming up for second reading? Now that's important to you if you're interested in lobbying because you need to know when that second bill is coming up because that's when you get to have your say. You can find that from this way or by calling the council. It sometimes towards the later of the session gets a little hurried and that's one of the things that is too bad, but the legislature's caught with 1,000 bills. They can't always schedule bills when they'd like to. But you can find that, and if you want to go and testify, and I think you're going to talk about lobbying, aren't you?
Yeah.
Maybe, so I don't want to get into that. I'm not a lobbyist anymore, I got out.
Let's go ahead and take a break. We do have a couple packets over there for some free registrants. Gina Marie and Lisa Page, we do have packets over here for you. And then we do have some extra packets. So if you're here with a large group, let's try and at least get your organization at least one packet. And otherwise, let's take your name and address, and we'll try and mail you a packet after the program. We have to do some more photocopies. So go ahead and have some cookies and some coffee, and we'll reconvene about 5 after the hour. But we'll go ahead with our second presentation, and that's Vivian Brooke. Vivian is a past president of the League of Women Voters of Missoula, so she's very special to me. She's one of my champions, one of those women who went on from nonpartisan politics, which is what the League is involved in, to partisan politics, and has successfully won 3 campaigns. She's now in her 3rd term at the legislature. Her committees include the Judiciary, Natural Resources, and Local Government. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vivian. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. It's really good to be here, and I think Earl gave a great introduction about some groundwork on our good information, just a foundation for you all if you're interested in putting together a bill and if you have a good idea, and that's usually how bills begin, just with a good idea. I'm going to try and cover as much as I can about lobbying, and I'd welcome Earl and Harry to chime in with some additional information if they see fit, or else maybe they can share some of their stories from their sessions of how they were lobbied and so forth. But I'd like to just start out by saying I see Earl brought the same book, and this was published, what year? 83. We the People of Montana. It's a terrific resource. It isn't as up-to-date as you would like it to be, but it really gives a good overview of the process in Montana's government and how we went from a real antiquated constitution to the new age when we passed the 1972 Constitution. So that's really the emphasis of this book, but it's an excellent resource, and I went through it this week just to kind of highlight some of the lobbying things that they reference. And at one time when we were, when it first came out, the League was instrumental in trying to distribute these books, so there may be some back in the files.
There are copies available upstairs.
Okay, great, Don.
Mountain Press published it, so we probably get it Mountain Press if anybody's interested.
And I just, for just a reference point to start with, I'd like to read a little bit from K. Ross Toole that was quoted in this book to let you know that we as a state have come a long ways in the area of lobbying from where we were at in the 1920s. Lobbying in the Montana legislature was part art, part cold cash, part rubber hose bludgeoning, and part cajolery, all of which was mixed with a perpetual stag drinking room, prohibition notwithstanding. The company ran the only legislative information agency that existed, a service rendered gratis to all senators and representatives. The exact status of any bill at any moment could be ascertained simply by asking the appropriate company lobbyist. They also provided gratis a bill writing service, and any legislator who wanted a bill drawn up had merely to outline his desires to the appropriate company lobbyist, and the finished product was delivered, often within a matter of hours. Lobbyists, who were not themselves legislators, were Republicans, Democrats, or independents. Take your choice. They were ubiquitous but egregious. Thank you. They were informed, skilled, and their sources were unlimited. So was their resourcefulness, but by far the best parliamentarians available were the company lobbyists. Not often, but occasionally, they were caught off guard, and a bill would hit the floor and come to a vote without the House or Senate having been briefed. It was then a source of great amusement to
legislature watchers to observe the heads swing toward the gallery where company men were always posted so that the signal could be given. So I think that as
Was there when I first started.
so I think we've come a long way with a broad base of people coming to the legislature with the open meeting law that's been in effect now, and also just the fact that people have become more and more wanting to be part of the public policy making and aware of issues. First of all, I would like to just talk a little bit about the pre-campaign lobbying that you could do, and I realize that we're post-campaign now, but some of you who are involved in groups and individuals who worked on campaigns probably realized that you wanted to get involved in a campaign probably for some particular reason, or you wanted to interact with the candidates. And as a candidate to the legislature, we get questionnaires from many, many groups. The National Rifle Association, to the School Boards Association, to the bankers, to the Contractors Association, and many, many associations send questionnaires out to try to get your response to how you would vote on particular issues of interest to them. Some of the more organized groups and larger groups will then compile those questionnaires and perhaps make formal endorsements. Montana NARAL put out a voter's choice for pro-choice voters. The Right to Life also did the same thing. And then from those endorsements, many groups that have the wherewithal will donate to a candidate's campaign and send money. Those are in the form of through PACs, the political action committees, and so you might get a contribution from the MEA PAC or from the Burlington Northern PAC, depending on who thinks that you're going to help them out in their issues. That does in no way obligate you to vote their way, by the way. You can always take their money and vote against them at a given time in the process. And I think a lot of people have been known to do that, and I think there's a lot of criticism about PACs and their influence, but if you go back, there are some, and many instances when legislators don't feel that in Montana, I don't think, feel the great need that they're obligated by those campaign contributions. And there are limits on campaign contributions by PACs and individuals. Then the other influence that in pre-campaign days is if you work on a campaign, and I know Earl mentioned if you wanted to find a friendly legislator to sponsor your particular bill, it might have been that you knew that legislator because you worked on his or her campaign. You might have even just had a yard sign in your yard, but that legislator felt some type of connection with you at that point and would be open to having listen at least to your issue and your idea for a bill. And I think those are real important connections to make. I think a lot of times the public has demeaned the political process, and we've taken a lot of grief about dirty politics and dirty politicians. And yet I think when you're involved in the political process by having a yard sign or helping your candidate go door to door or whatever it is, or holding a neighborhood coffee, I think that really lets you into the process of helping to create the kind of public policy you want. And I think that's what we're all about lobbying and interacting with our legislators and our candidates. The second part of the process for lobbying is the pre-session or post-campaign, which we touched on. And there are many ways to contact your legislator who's been elected in your district, or people who you want to know how they feel. As I said before, there are groups that are out there. I brought a couple of things. This is one way that people contact. This is a Montana Association of Realtors. People are busy. Candidates or legislators are busy post election to pre-session. Right now, we're being invited to dinners and gatherings, and all kinds of groups are trying to get our attention. Some groups, instead of having a formalized gathering and taking up maybe one of our evenings or lunch hour, just send out their position papers. The bankers did this also. We received in the mail what their positions are. I think we've gotten that from school administrators in the past, but at sometimes they've also had us to dinner or had us just to an evening meeting. Then you get into some of the larger groups that will wine and dine you quite royally. I think we're invited to a dental association group next week, which I can't make, but I think Carrie will probably be there taking up.
Moved. I don't get any of these invitations in the mail anymore.
So we go and we drink their wine and we eat their prime rib. And
No sugar in the dinner.
and then we go and vote the way we want. We listen to their issues, but we take all these things under consideration. But those are methods and techniques that some of the groups do. Also, I got a call yesterday from someone in a state agency who wanted to know what I saw as how the budget crisis was going to affect that particular agency. So it can be just a simple telephone call, or maybe just getting together for coffee down at the Department of Family Services with the social workers to try to warn them of the impending danger. And one of the things that I wanted to tell you all very definitely, that in taking up the practice of lobbying or the activity, I think that we all have to remember that it's going to cost some money at some point in time, whether it's gas to get to Helena, whether it's long distance calls, whether it's organizing a mailing, there's postage and secretarial time to get your message across. So don't think that you can come into this process, even though it is the public process, and we're all entitled to having our say in the process. It's going to be something that you might want to set aside money for. If it's a priority for you, I would advise you to think about in terms of allotting yourself in a monthly budget a certain amount for long distance telephone calls. That's just the way it works, because we don't have an 800 number over there we have an 800 number for bill status, but it doesn't get you the message to your legislator where you really need to get the message to. So just that as a preface, I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people have a resistance like, oh, I can't afford to drive over to Helena. Well, look ahead and try to think about that in terms of your own budget or your group's budget, to set aside. And people spend a lot of money on lobbying. Nonprofit groups or small groups that are on a tight budget have to really figure things out and try to maybe do some fundraising specifically for that. But it does cost money, plain and simple. We have a shorter distance to Helena from Missoula than the Wolf Point people do, but it's 250 miles round trip. So just plan on that, and good snow tires too help. So in this pre-campaign or post-campaign session also, if you are a regular PAC, or you are going to have a lobbyist that's going to get some money for their time, you have to register with the Commissioner for Political Practices as a registered lobbyist. If you're an individual that comes over to testify on a bill, that's not necessary. But if you belong to a group and you are going to pay somebody even just a minimum amount just to monitor a bill, if they're getting some money or salary in some way, that person has to be registered with the Commissioner on Political Practices. And that's a very simple process. The office is available, and they have forms to fill out, and then you register. And then those reports are available in January and amended later in the session to show who the official lobbyists are and who they represent. And those are very useful tools for you as a lobbyist to know what other groups are out there that are lobbying and who the people are. When you come to Helena during the session, if you do come to Helena, first of all, I know when I first went over, I was very intimidated because I think I went with the League on the League of Women Voters Day over in the legislature, and Capitol's a huge building. You probably have all been there, but for those of you who haven't, it's always good to kind of get your bearings before you go. There's some real good resources in the packet that you have, the floor plan of the Capitol, just to kind of look, because when you get there, everybody looks like they know what they're doing. They're running around. They don't, but they look like it. And you think, oh my God, I'm the only one here that doesn't know where the stairs are, whatever, or where the pop machine is, if that's the thing you're looking for. But so kind of get your, do some homework, and I think in your groups you'll probably be doing that, or just as an individual. I always like to say that the Music Man had the right attitude. You got to know the territory, and that includes a lot more than just the floor plan of the Capitol. It includes the people who are in the Capitol and their functions. So you've got to know the people. For instance, if you have a bill that's going to be heard by the Education Committee, that book that describes the legislators in your packet will also be published for this next session, and you can pick that up, a new copy of it up at the information table at the rotunda of the Capitol. When you come to the Capitol, there is excellent resources now. There's a real good source of, just spend some time at the table, the information table. They'll answer a lot of your questions about where the committees are, where they're meeting, and then they'll give you these resources, and you can see who's on the committee. You might be able to do this before you come. And find out as much as you can about the people. I mean, you don't need to do an FBI in-depth search of their background, but it's always nice to know, because if you went to school in Glendive, or high school in Glendive, and there's a legislator from Glendive on the committee, those are the kinds of things that are so helpful in lobbying, that small town connection, those connections that might be meaningful, and the legislator will remember you because you took the time to know a little bit about that legislator. Besides the book that you have in your packet, there is the Copper Book, which is a much valued resource to the lobbyists, and I think they have them available here in the library and in the Mansfield Library at the university. If you go back to last session, you can learn a lot about a lot of the legislators, where they were born, how many kids they have, what their spouses' names are, just all kinds of just general, folksy kinds of information like that really gives you an entree into some type of relationship with someone, say, from Glasgow or Billings or somewhere other than your hometown. So I would recommend, if you have the time and if you have the interest and you want to be kind of a Montana lobbyist, that's pretty much what the big company people do, as well as the individual lobbyists who are there for one particular bill. They try to find some connections so that you can then jump into your issue, and an entree is really important. One of the other things that I think that you need to be aware of is that there is a dress code in the Senate particularly. We don't respect it as well in the House, but
Certain members don't.
But anyway, but in the halls, you will stand out if you're not kind of in the regular dress code of the halls, I guess. There's, and I don't want to say that you need to always, if you're a guy, wear a you know, a three-piece suit, but a jacket and a tie or sweater and a tie always is, you don't stand out as somebody that doesn't know what's going on. And I think that if that's your purpose over there, that you want to look like what you are doing is legitimate and valid, that you want to give the message also in how you appear. Everyone wears a name tag in the halls and on the House floor and the Senate floor. And that's really a very nice thing to do. I always think on the off seasons, we all should have our name tags on because there's too many people to get to know in this process. But just given the fact that there are a lot of people in the process, it's everyone wears their name tag, and so then if you've met the person before, you see their name tag and, oh yeah, right, kind of jogs your memory. And while you're talking to the person, at least you're trying to remember who they are. So those are a couple of things, just detail things. The other thing is there are certain hours that you can, as a lobbyist, be on the Senate floor or the House floor. Now, in the House of Representatives, we don't have our own individual offices, and particularly this time, the Democrats are in the minority there. Many of them will, probably none of them will have an office, so their office is their desk on the House floor. And you can usually find your legislator if the committees aren't meeting, if they're not in a committee, if session is on, they'll be on the House floor. But in those interim times when you can approach them, early in the morning, from before committees meet, a lot of people come in to read the paper and just kind of find out what's going on for the day. They're on the House floor. And but 2 hours before and after the session, you're not allowed on the floor, and the doorman will tell you that in no uncertain terms. So he's just a little guy, but he's very he's tough. And now in the Senate, they do have their own individual offices, but you can usually get that information from the Senate secretary or the sergeant of arms as to where you might be able to find your senator. It's always good, however, to call ahead or write ahead and let that person know if you are going to be coming, just to let them know. And then we have lots of things on our calendar, so usually if a constituent of mine will write me or call me and say they're coming over with a particular group, I'll write it down on my calendar and make sure that I'm kind of watching and aware. And you can send messages into the House floor or the Senate floor through a page, and they might come out then, and if they're not busy with second reading, particular third reading, that legislator might be able to come out. You might have to wait for a while, so just be prepared of that. So that contact takes on, I mean, there are certain rules that you should know about contacting your legislator while you're in Helena. And those are some of the basics that I've just gone over. However, in contacting that person, if you're not going to come to Helena and you want to just send them a letter, I think you've probably all gone over some of the letter writing techniques to be concise. If you're interested in a particular bill, state that bill number and title, the very first sentence or the very first paragraph, so it stands out. And I know for those of you who use word processors now, you might even put it in bold, it's not, or underline it, something so that that legislator can then grab that piece of paper, highlight that bill, and put it in the bill file or some place that they know their constituent or someone that they've had some contact with perhaps is interested in this bill, so that when that bill is either in their committee or on second reading, they'll say, oh yeah, that was something that Joe Smith was interested in, and I remember talking to him when I went door to door, so they get out the letter. Now, there are letters that you don't want to write, and I brought an example of that from a fellow here in town who owns a small business, and I think we all got this letter. Vivian Brook, comma, your voting record supporting small business in Montana is absolutely disgusting, period.
That's normal.
Well, you know, it gets your attention, but I don't think it opens up the doors for healthy communication. So that's an example of something that probably I've kept, and I've done a little research on why he thought my voting record was absolutely disgusting, and I don't know what I'll do with it, but he isn't a constituent, so I'm not too worried about it. But anyway, some of the so writing a letter is there's techniques, and I think that if you want more information about that kind of thing, your support groups that you're in or your associations usually have. A lot of associations might send out a sample letter. You just follow that sample letter. We get inundated sometimes with letters that are all the same. Sometimes it's nice to vary those because a lot of them will go in just file 13. And or else you just kind of start your stack. I think on the gambling
Sometimes
issue,
we count how many we get.
yeah. And I know I'm on natural resources, and there was a proposal to draw water out of some of the closed off mines in the Bull Mountains, and I tell you, I think I got more letters on that particular issue from that area of the state. I didn't know anybody over there, but they sent the same letter to every person on the Natural Resource Committee, and the whole community, I think, had a meeting and got this letter, and they just sent it out to everybody. So there are different techniques, and I think the more individualized that you can make it, the better, as far as just making that contact. The other way of contacting legislators during the session, of course, is by telephone, and we get pink slips on our desk, little pink slips, and when we're away from our desk, we'll come back and we'll have a few pink slips, and usually when there's time, most often, I think, every legislator usually responds to a call if it says, please call. You have an option of whether you want a person to call back or whether you just want to say yes or no on a bill. And there again, we'll add up our pink slips about, you know, the yes or no's on the bills and see what kinds of feel there is out there in the grassroots for this particular issue. I know I've had a page then sometimes look up addresses if they were a constituent of mine, and I might make a letter response to a telephone call simply because I know that person and they contacted me on a bill. And it's always nice to hear from your constituents, particularly. So I try to do that kind of follow-up. I'll just after the bill is gone through the House, I usually try to give a little report about, you know, where it was and what I did on it. The calls, I think, are really important. I think that you get a lot of attention, and it's easy. We have access to telephones there in the legislature. We can spend time in the evening or whatever to return phone calls. So I think that if you make a call and you want information, you know, I don't think you can rely on your legislator to give you an update every day about, you know, the session or anything like that. But if you're interested in a particular bill, don't feel shy about just calling and leaving a message on a bill and see what kind of response you get from your legislator. I think in this day and age and time of people being aware that we need to be responsive, I think we'll find that you'll find that you get return phone calls.
Now, is there a single phone number for the Senate and the House?
Yes.
One can use to reach
444-4800. And there's a very good operation there. They handle a lot of telephone calls. They usually have a really efficient person as the head person on the calls, and they use other staff plus pages to get the message. And you usually get, you know, the phone number right, the name right, everything like that.
I guess the reason I asked is that I know between the regular session and the summer special session, they changed all the phone numbers, and it really threw everybody off.
aware of that.
I don't know if you guys were aware of that or not, but there were
number
some
doesn't
of us,
operate.
there were some
during
of us
session.
just struggling to
Maybe-
figure out
I
what the
wonder
right
if
number
they-
was.
I wonder if they didn't just get that 4800 number up and running for the special session, I don't know.
It's possible, I don't know what went on there, but sometime between those two sessions, something went haywire. It was hard to get into the number that was listed in that book.
Oh.
Do fax messages get?
Yes, fax is another form of, and I know in there is a fax machine down at the information table. The fax number for the legislative council is, I think, in one of the directories, and then they rig up the fax number at the information table, and that should be available to the public. And that's very efficient too, and gets both the telephone call and the letter combined. So it's, yeah, I would recommend that if you have that available to you as a resource. That's probably going to be used more this session than it has been too. So I know I use fax a lot for if I haven't heard, if there's somebody, say like in the county health department here, that had promised to get me some testimony to the committee and hadn't gotten it, or the mail didn't come on that, I'll call that morning and encourage them to just fax it over.
But sometime between those two sessions, something went haywire. It was hard to get into the number that was listed in that book.
Oh.
Do fax messages get?
Yes, fax is another form of, and I know in there is a fax machine down at the information table. The fax number for the legislative council is, I think, in one of the directories, and then they rig up the fax number at the information table, and that should be available to the public. And that's very efficient too, and gets both the telephone call and the letter combined. So it's, yeah, I would recommend that if you have that available to you as a resource. That's probably going to be used more this session than it has been too. So I know I use fax a lot for if I haven't heard, if there's somebody, say like in the county health department here, that had promised to get me some testimony to the committee and hadn't gotten it, or the mail didn't come on that, I'll call that morning and encourage them to just fax it over to me, and then I can make copies to hand out on a bill that I'm sponsoring. So that's very helpful. As you know, in grassroots operations, it's always good to have a telephone tree if you can. If you have a statewide organization, and you have on all the committees, there is geographical representation, most likely. And that our state is a big state to cover, and we've got people sitting on all the committees from eastern Montana, north and west corner of Montana. So if you have a good telephone tree, a statewide organization, you can get that committee covered pretty well by jogging that person with one of a constituent to call and say, I'm really interested in more funding for this, or cutting that program out, or whatever it is that your issue is. If you can identify a constituent to a committee member in your organization, that's one of the best ways of lobbying there is. And that a telephone call is about as efficient as anything in that particular situation if there's a bill that's being debated in the committee or on the House floor at that time. And there's certain times of the process that we talked about that are important to contact your legislator. And I think Harry's going to talk about how a bill goes through. And so, or do you want me to?
You go ahead.
Okay. In the committee hearing, and Earl mentioned this, is when you testify on a bill, and most likely, if you have, say, a bill that, let's just use a situation where I know the Montana People's Action are interested in trailer court legislation, and you're going to be having certain bills to change the law regarding trailer courts. Well, you're going to have, those bills will probably have a lot of intense testimony on both sides, proponents and opponents. We had a landlord-tenant bill in the session last time, and it was one of the most intense hearings in the Judiciary Committee. And I was impressed by the tenants over the landlords simply because the tenants had their testimony in order and concise and organized. The landlords just, the realtors just kind of lined up behind the podium and just started their diatribes at us. And nobody had taken the time to say, okay, now you talk about how it affects this particular situation, and the next person talk about how it affects this situation. If we sit there in the committee for, if you're only allotted an hour of testimony and it's a half hour divided between the two groups, proponents and opponents, we don't want to hear the same thing over again for the whole half hour. We want to hear a different angle. We want to hear how it affects health situation, safety, how you interact with county taxes, that you pay county taxes through your rent, or whatever it is. We want to hear something a little bit different from the testifiers on each side. So the better organized you can be during your time, because at certain times of after things get rolling, the committee chair is going to have to regulate, and what they do with the bill sponsor, they'll say, well, how many people are coming over to testify on this bill? And the sponsor might say, we've got hundreds of people coming. Well, those hundreds of people coming can sit there, but the fact is, the time allotted will only allow for 10 people perhaps to testify. Keep it concise, keep it to, I mean, when you start seeing glassy eyes and dazed looks and people nodding off, getting up and leaving, you know that you haven't organized your testimony as well as you should have. And I think that's really crucial. So be sure to have kind of a referee or a coach who's been there perhaps before and knows the system, maybe has done a bill before, so that they can say, and take the order, you know, don't be afraid to have somebody give orders of how it's going to be organized, because that's really crucial. And if you come in looking really organized and the opponents look totally disorganized and bore us to death, you're going to have a few more points, even if the content stinks. You're still going to have more points if you look organized. So I really recommend that you gather your forces together perhaps the night before, and come over the day before and kind of look things over, and gather your forces and kind of really put it together, and give everybody if you can, who's going to testify when. Now that's not to say that you might not have somebody pop up out of the audience and get real emotional. That does happen too. So, I mean, it's not just well scripted all the time, so you never know what surprises you're going to have. I know I've had that happen on bills I've had. I thought I knew everybody that was going to be a proponent, and all of a sudden there's somebody pops up as another proponent, or more than likely an opponent that you weren't sure about. If you're lobbying against a bill, and you're over in Helena a lot, for instance, if you have several issues, it's polite to go to the sponsor and tell them that you're going to come in and lobby against it, or that you have objections to it. It's out of respect to the process, so that sponsor doesn't get blindsided. And sometimes you can work things through. Maybe that particular opponent just has a particular problem with one specific part of the bill, and you can come to an agreement of an amendment before the committee, and then the committee will take that under advisement during the executive session. So it's really crucial. The communication, the more open it is, the better, you know, and it's really, it's just a very good kind of the rules of the game. The more you treat people with respect, the more respect you'll get. And that happens on the House floor. If someone's going to amend your bill in second reading, it's kind of proper to go over to the sponsor and say, I have an amendment, and to try to provide a copy of that amendment, so that they aren't going to be just trying to pass their bill on second reading and then all of a sudden be surprised by an opponent's amendment to probably kill the bill on second reading. So those kinds of things are, you don't, I mean, you try to set your strategy, but try to do it in a way that respects others and respects the process too. So I don't think, so you don't think that you're really pulling something, because usually you get stung, because that's only the first house that you have to go through. And if you do something in the house that the opponents thought was outrageous, they'll get you in the Senate. And that's happened to me before I really knew what was going on. And I had a person who had encouraged me to sponsor a bill, and I finally realized that the tactics that person was using were tactics that I didn't like. So as a legislator, you start drawing away from being drawn into sponsoring bills for people like that. I think I'll just end with this final note, is that on these kinds of issues, as far as respecting others, I think you have to know that as a lobbyist, your greatest asset is trust. Trust by the legislator that you're dealing with, trust by all the legislators that you contact. Once you violate that trust, it's almost impossible to get it back. So when you sit down with a legislator and you say, and you're lobbying that legislator directly about this bill that you want to pass, and they haven't taken a vote in the committee, for instance. You had your hearing, the information is fresh on their mind, you might catch the legislator going between the committee hearing and the House session and say to them, could I talk to you a couple of minutes just about why we think this bill is important? And usually they'll stop it if they don't have another appointment. And you try to convince them further about that testimony. Well, if you deceive them at that point with false information, or threats are always, not very good to use, but people do. If you do other kinds of tactics that aren't above board and trustworthy, and then they go into the executive session and find out that some of the information that you provided them was false or misleading or some otherwise embarrassing to them to believe in it, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to stop that legislator or to have your calls returned or any of those other kinds of techniques that you've already developed in open communication. So I think that besides being aware that it's going to cost money for you, I think you have to value the highest thing that you have between you and that legislator is the trust that that legislator has in you, that you're providing them the correct information. So I'm just going to end on that. Any questions?
But I have one little addition.
Yeah.
People who come to the legislature frequently, that is private individuals, sometimes get their feelings pretty high. Naturally, they're working with one big no, never threaten the legislator. If you do, you're guaranteed you'll vote against it. I had one session, just as illustration, had a group of farm people from the High Line came down. They had a bill, people were all right. But in the House, they came from place to place, and the fellow said to me, you vote against that bill and I see you won't come back next time, which they told the House. I would have staked my thing, I'd vote against it. If I would put it in, I would have voted against it. I said to him, I come from Missoula, you haven't a damn chance of voting for me, and I won't vote for your bill no matter how long you're in here, which I guess wasn't very nice. They just completely lost the bill by being threatening, never threatened, because it won't work. It comes because you get so tight, I want this bill to go, damn, that guy isn't helping me, and you sound off. Go out and smoke a cigarette, drink coffee, do anything, but never threaten the legislature or you're dead in the water.
Are those people who are giving testimony before a legislative committee oftentimes questioned by the committee as to the source of their information and so forth?
Yes, and the testimony by both proponents and opponents, a lot of times you will write up your own testimony or have written testimony and distribute that written testimony so that the person can take it with them. We do get a lot of that kind, or else perhaps charts or information that you think is good to help your arguments. Yeah.
On the committee assignments, for the legislators being assigned to the committees, when can we get that information so we know what people to target on which committees?
Next weekend, we have our caucuses. The Democrats and Republicans will be caucusing in Helena and electing leadership. It's more than likely in the House that John Mercer will be Speaker of the House. There are 3 people running for minority leader, and I'm not clear as to who's the front runner on that race. But that minority leader, as far as what in the Democratic Party, will get forms from every Democratic House member of their preference for their first, second, and third committees. And that person, I think, will be able to then submit those suggestions to the majority or the Speaker, and the Speaker makes the assignments. And I'm not sure how long that process will take for John to...
Normally, probably the first or second week of the first week of the legislature should be completed. That is about it,
I think that as I see it right now, many of the legislators will probably be in many of their same committees, the incumbents. It usually is a wise thing to any leader to keep that experience on that committee solid. But there are many, many freshmen. What about 30 freshmen this time in the House? Now that committee assignment will be made by the President of the Senate. Is that who does the committee?
We have a committee on committees.
Committee on committees, that's right. So, Arlene?
My question has to do with the scenario that happens so frequently that a hearing is called and a person gets their testimony ready to go the next morning and wakes up to a blizzard. And what is your suggestion as the best way then to get this report or material? Is this the time for a fax? Or what should this person do who wakes up and finds that they're really not going to get to Helena for that hearing?
I'd recommend the first thing to do is call the sponsor who your contact is right away and see if the bill can be changed, the date can be changed. Sometimes that happens. That's you can't do it for every time, but I've been in committees where they've made exceptions on schedules just because the majority of people who were interested in the bill were unable to get there. The second thing is then to fax your information over, and it's good also to, at any given time in the process, to develop some good Helena contacts. And Helena people are, I know in different associations, one bill I had, I couldn't believe every single time it was scheduled that the guy from Great Falls had some major tragedy happen. I mean, they were serious, and I could not believe we could not ever get these couple of people. I think one was from Great Falls and one was from Billings, and they could never come for these hearings. So they relied on people in their association from Helena. They might not have been as well prepared because they weren't focused on that issue, but if you can get them the material and get a live body there, it's much better, and or try to get the bill date schedule changed.
Do you need to make arrangements or be invited to testify at a hearing, or can you just show up? And also, how do you find out exactly when the hearings are going to be scheduled and how long they're going to last?
The committee schedule is in the booklet that you have. There are 3 classes of committees, and they meet during the day at specific times, so that is usually a standard schedule that hardly varies. So you can start from there. There's, I think it's in our rules that, or somewhere, that a hearing has to be noticed 3 days in advance. So the library and the county clerk and recorder and the university library all have access to, you do have access to the computer hookup, don't you? Or the bill.
Yeah, it's over at the county courthouse, I
County
think,
courthouse.
is ours. I know the session before the last one, we would have that update status of the bills delivered in our book drop daily. Last year, they didn't do that for whatever reason. We, at the library, get the copies of the bills every single day. And it's a status report with those, but there's at least a day or two lag time when we get those, and we try to get those on file as quickly as possible. And the schedules will always appear in the Missoulian, too. But sometimes that's a little too late to give you much advance notice.
Sometimes, like on a Sunday paper, they'll have as many in a schedule in the Missoulian as they can for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday or something. And Great Falls Tribune has been a good source also for it being in the newspaper. But the best way to do it is to, if the county clerk and recorder has that computer, that you can type in the bill's number, or if you're just in general interested in a subject like trailer courts and you want to know what all bills have been introduced on trailer courts, just type in trailer courts usually is, and it'll bring up the numbers, and then you can contact the legislative council or the Capitol or come to the library and find those bills by number. Say if there were 5 bills that you were interested in, you knew the numbers, you can usually find them in the library then. So there's mechanisms in place that we try in the legislative system to inform the public. A lot of groups that have someone there in Helena all the time will certainly inform their members that way when they know when the bill is scheduled. And you can usually if you're in Helena, you can keep in touch with the committee chair who schedules the bills, just to find out when that bill is going to be heard. And also, I've never met a committee chair that hasn't really been very accommodating. If you want to come on Valentine's Day because you have a bill to do with heart disease, or some tie-in like that, the committee chair, usually if you give that committee chair enough time to work that out, they'll do that for you. So that they get the bills assigned to them, as they're introduced, and then they want to get things moving through the process. If you want to delay it for a couple of weeks, let them know, and they usually are very accommodating. Their schedules have to, though, be set, and they want to keep things moving. So I think if again, the respect on, but the information's there, and it's just that you have the newspapers calling the 800 number for the information, and the computer lookup, and the libraries for the copies of bills and bill status.
Can individuals tap into that computer system?
Yeah. And your own legislator. I mean, that's what they're accountable for. And as broad a base of support as you can get, it's wonderful. I mean, like for instance, I keep going back to the trailer courts idea. I mean, the incidents that we've had here in Missoula with the county health departments, if there's a way that particular group can tie in on some piece of your issue about regulating septic systems in trailer parks, I mean, you've got a lot broader base of support than just residents or people concerned about it. So, does that make sense?
I believe Michael's second part of his question was, in order to give testimony, then do you have to be invited, or do you just need? No, that's okay. I want to know.
I forgot.
Do you need to contact the legislator?
It's good to, it's good to have some connection to the proponents who are going in, but nobody needs a formal invitation. A lot of people who are there anyway might bounce around and just, for instance, if there's a group, like the League of Women Voters has had a paid lobbyist some years, and that person might not have a bill hearing that has been designated as a high priority, but they're interested in something to do with the open meeting law, for instance, has come up before a committee. So they'll sit there for a while and listen, and if they think of something from the League of Women Voters perspective, they might get up and offer that testimony. So, that's how some things work in the mix there.
But you just kind of show up at the hearing?
Yeah. And sign in. Everybody has to sign in, and that's just for the record. And when you get up in front of the committee, you state your name and who you represent, or if you're just representing yourself, you say that. It's the routine kind of language that goes with the...
Realizing there's only a certain amount of time for testimony, but does having a bunch of people or a large audience of support make a difference to the community members?
Yes. I had my first appropriations bill this last session was real interesting. It was a bill that the Native American people wanted about protection of burial site, and that several people came from the Salish Kootenai area or reservation to come and testify or just to be there, and the chair of the Appropriations Committee asked them all to stand because there wasn't time for testimony. He wanted to see how many people had driven in to support this bill, and sometimes if you have so many, they'll have to change the meeting room to a bigger meeting room.
Let's take one more question.
Do you need to get yourself or your group on the agenda in advance if you want to testify at a committee hearing?
No, the hearing is just open, and usually there'll be some communication between the sponsor and the chair of the committee, so the chair of the committee knows how long it will be and about how many people are coming in and that kind of general information. But there's nothing that you need to do actually, other than the more communication you can have, the better. But there's nothing that's down, set that you have to schedule it, yourself there.
Okay, well, thank you, Vivian. I'm sure we're going to have more questions for you when Harry finishes talking, too. Let's go ahead and take another little 5-minute break and stretch our legs, and we'll reconvene. Harry will get to see you. So much longer.
How are you, Gary?
A second announcement, Vivian was mentioning that some organizations let people know when bills are up on certain issues. And the League of Women Voters is one of those organizations. We publish what's called capital reports. And our lobbyist that we have hired will be following legislation on the tax issue, the revenue issue, also on solid waste issues, and on subdivision this year, and on choice. We always follow choice. So we will be putting out a newsletter called Capital Reports throughout the legislative session on these 4 issues. And if you would like to subscribe to that, we will be happy to take your subscriptions. It's $15. You can sign up at the registration table on your way out. The $15 basically covers postage and photocopying for the reports. We're not trying to make any money on this at all. And we figure that we'll put out at least 1 issue every week on these 4 topics. And before I introduce Harry, I want to thank our speakers today and give them a wonderful round of applause. I've been very impressed, and I think that everyone else has been. A lot of very valuable information has been handed out today, and I'm really pleased.
I just want to say that we were defined as experts, but I hope this crowd knows what the definition of an expert is. X is an unknown quality, and spurt is a drip under high pressure.
Okay. Well, our third legislative veteran is Harry Fritz. He served 2 terms in the House, and he's in the middle of his first term in the Senate. Last legislative session, he vice-chaired the Education Committee. And I'm going to turn it over to Harry for the third part of this workshop.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming out this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't talk, and I didn't even run for president. But these, my 2 predecessors here, I think have given you a good deal of the ins and outs of the legislative process, and I'll try and put the legislature in a somewhat larger context for you. One thing I would add to Vivian's presentation, she mentioned that lobbyists register with the Commissioner on Political Practices. Commissioners appointed for a 6-year term by the governor, and it must rotate between political parties. And the current commissioner is a Democrat, and her term expires next month, so we'll have a new commissioner on political practices before the next session. But she circulates a list of registered lobbyists, and that list hits about 1,200 people and organizations. So there's 1,200 lobbyists and 150 legislators. That's 8 to 1. Fortunately, only 3 or 4 dozen of them live in the Capitol during the legislative session. Most of them are just there for their issue or for a few days or weeks. But you get to know the regulars. They're kind of like the woodwork there at the Capitol. Well, you folks know that the Montana legislature meets for 90 days every 2 years. A number of citizens of Montana wish that it met for 2 days every 90 years, but the Constitution doesn't say that. It's a little better than the previous system before the '72 Constitution, when it met for 60 straight days every 2 years. So essentially the months of January and February with no breaks. The Constitution of '72 created annual sessions, but it only operated once. The legislature met in annual sessions in 1973 and 1974. And then in 1974, the voters got hold of the Constitution, and the first time they amended it, they went back to biennial sessions of 90 days, like we have now. And we've tried, I think, 3 times in the last 20 years to get a constitutional amendment through to return to the annual sessions as the 1972 Constitution had set up. Each time they've failed. Even legislative opponents of annual sessions get turned around when they get there. They become strong supporters of annual sessions after one 90-day session. But I think the people of Montana have spoken pretty clearly on this on 3 or 4 separate occasions, and so I don't think annual sessions is in the offing. There are ways, I think, that we could organize the legislature, its internal workings, a little bit better. There's no way that we can avoid the great rush at the end. Every legislative body that I've ever studied or been aware of has had a huge rush at the end. And no matter how carefully and rationally we organize the legislature, well, I'm sure we couldn't do away with that. And I'm not in favor of limiting the number of bills that each legislature can introduce. I think it's one of the virtues of the Montana legislature. I think we could do a lot more on the timing of those bills. No legislator can introduce or can ask for a bill draft request until after the election, when they know that you're going to be in there, except for holdover senators. Well, they have to be elected. Out there unopposed. But the fact is that most bill draft requests don't go in before the legislature itself. Quite a few do. And so the first month of the session, you do have a few bills that are heard, but the Legislative Council is busy drafting all these bills, so it takes a 45-day session and really crams it into about 3 weeks because of the timing. I think there's some reforms you can make in the legislative process to improve the timing of the introduction and drafting of bills. The committee system, I think, that the other speakers have talked about, I think it works. In every legislative session, there are about 2,000 bill draft requests. And newspaper editors all over the state throw up their hands and say, what a workload, you can't possibly handle it, you're overloading the circuits over there. But of those 2,000 bill draft requests, at least 25% never see the light of day. They're either gather dust down in the Legislative Council offices, or they're combined with other measures. So the legislature deals with about 1,500 bills. Half of those bills, I'd say more than half, are technical measures, housekeeping measures, moving periods around, dotting I's and crossing T's, little glitches that have been discovered in the codes, in the printed codes. Totally non-controversial, uncontroversial. Hearings over before it starts, last a couple of minutes. Somebody explain why we need this, and it's kind of rubber stamped right through the process. Most of the other bills are it'll take a little more time, but I would say that the big issues that you have to hold a hearing in the Supreme Court chamber so you can pack a few hundred people in, big symbolic measures, resolutions and bills, probably number no more than about 4 or 5 dozen during the session. There are 15 or more committees in each legislative body. You know, these bills come in and are assigned to these committees. Some of them never get out of the committee, or they come out with an adverse committee report. So 2,000 bill drafting requests sounds like a tremendous overworkload, but it doesn't come out to that, in my opinion, in the session. They never get called up. They get dealt with summarily, and we have plenty of time, I think, to deal with the major measures of the day. To put the legislature in a little bit of historical context for you. I still think that the most important thing that's happened to the legislative process in Montana is not the Constitution of 1972, but the reapportionment decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court, which helped to trigger the movement for constitutional reform in Montana in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Before then, Montana was one of the most malapportioned states in the nation. We had one senator, for example, from every county in Montana. There were 56 senators in the Montana State Senate. At the time that the decisions came down in the mid-60s, more than half of the people of Montana lived in just 7 counties. They had 7 senators. Less than half of the people lived in 49 counties. They had 49 senators. The senators representing 16% of the people could constitute a majority in the Montana legislature. Now, the House factored in an additional representative for every 8,500 people, which evened it out a little bit, but it was still pretty malapportioned. A minority of the population could control the House as well. So that when the U.S. District Court mandated reapportionment on Montana, our argument was that we wanted to keep, in any way possible, one senator per county. And the district court said, well, of course you can keep 1 senator per county, but you need 747 senators in order to do that. I'm surprised we didn't take them up on that. So the first reapportionment was mandated by the courts. It didn't break county lines. We reapportioned again in 1971 after the 70 census and before the con elections. That reapportionment did create districts that violated county boundaries, and we have reapportioned again in 1973 and again in 1983, and again we're in the process of reapportionment now. Our reapportionment process is now set up in the Constitution of 72. The only problem with it I see is that it is delayed. It hasn't taken effect yet, even though the census was held 2 years ago. So it won't take effect until the 1994 elections, because the Constitution says that the legislature has to have a chance to comment on the final reapportionment decisions. Well, they're never done before the 91 session, so the first time we have a chance to comment on them is the 93 session, and then they can go into effect in time for the 95 session. And remains to be seen what happens in Missoula County, I think, in this latest reapportionment process. You may not realize it, but there are 7 senators for whom Missoula County consists of all or a portion of their district. 7 Missoula County senators. Some of these districts stretch up to St. Ignatius and down to Stevensville and encompass all of Mineral and Sanders County, and they go all the way over to Anaconda and to Wisdom in the Big Hole, but they encroach on Missoula County. We only have 3 senators from essentially the urban area that are totally located within the county, and I'm one of those 3. Reapportionment had a tremendous effect on the Montana legislature. Without reapportionment, it was overwhelmingly conservative and Republican. Most of the legislators came from based on counties. When apportionment was based on counties, most of these counties are in central and eastern Montana. They're the agricultural or rural areas. They're the counties, 40 of them, count them, 40 counties in Montana that have lost population pretty near every decade since they were created. They tended to override, strong Democratic, a stronghold like Butte that would have one senator and a couple of representatives, but it was no match for the Republican, some say the Lutheran dominance of the Montana legislature before reapportionment. Back in the 1920s, for example, the Republicans controlled the state House of Representatives by a margin of 96-9. That was politics as usual in Montana, 96-9. The Democrats would break through during the New Deal, for example, or given a farm revolt against Eisenhower's Secretary of Agriculture, Ezra Taft Benson, back in the 50s, while the Montana legislature would turn Democratic. But politics as normal in Montana was heavily Republican. Now, the reapportionment of the 60s and 70s and continuing has taken political power from the wide open spaces which are empty and put it into the cities and towns of Montana where the people live. And Montana is an urban state. Statistically, according to the census, more than half of the people live in cities and towns. Urban areas tend to be more liberal, more democratic, more competitive, more moderate than these die-hard conservative regions. And so I think that the effective reapportionment is to make the Montana legislature a lot more moderate than it used to be, a lot more democratic. It doesn't ensure a Democratic majority, but it ensures competitiveness. It ensures competitiveness. The legislature for the last 15 years has been very narrowly divided. I think that the House majority last term, 61 Democrats and 39 Republicans, was the biggest margin that any one party has had in the House of Representatives since the mid-70s. And that's right back now to a rather close 57-43 Republican majority. And I think that the 30-20 margin that the Democrats enjoy in the Senate coming up is the biggest margin that any one party has had in the Senate since the mid-1970s. I think that a lot of that is due to reapportionment. It's kind of institutionalized a more competitive balance among the political parties in the legislature. It has also, unfortunately, seemed, so far anyway, almost ensured that nothing will ever get done in Helena, or that it's very difficult to get anything done. Because basically we haven't had one-party government in Helena, that is, with the governor and both houses of the legislature in the hands of the same political party since 1975. So we're up to 17 years now and counting. These divisions in the legislature, I think, reflect very real divisions in the state of Montana, not just between parties, but between regions. I think the division between East and West in Montana is as strong as it's ever been now, and it breaks party lines like they're water. I mean, it's when an East-West issue comes up, the East votes one way and the West votes the other, regardless of party lines.
We're going to form a new state called West Dakota.
Right. I figure if Missoula could be the capital of the new state, including Spokane and northern Idaho, it'd be all right. Spokane wants to be the capital. Can't have that. So we like it or not, in representative government, in our Republican form of government, things get done when you have strong executive leadership and political party support in the legislature. Frankly, we haven't had that for 15 years, so it's no surprise, it seems to me, that the most significant legislative sessions in modern Montana history all occurred in the 70s, when fundamental environmental legislation was passed, and ethics legislation, and economic growth and development legislation, and the coal tax trust fund was established, and so forth. All dates from the 70s. We've just been playing the game according to the rules that were established in the 70s ever since. And we've played a politics of incrementalism, which is the way legislators work best, but I think it's had some political costs. I think it's increased the public hostility and cynicism to government. They see government itself as trapped and unable to act, unable to respond forthrightly to the crises that face the state. I think we saw one evidence of that in the overwhelming passage of term limits in the state of Montana. I think it's a big mistake, but it destroys the legislature's institutional memory, and it destroys its own history. We will remember what's happened in the past, but it gives more power to lobbyists by the way. But it is a professional legislature, and I think some of these speakers have touched on that. We do have a legislative council. It's a professional arm of the legislature. It was created as early as 1957. It consists of three major branches: the legislative fiscal auditor, and the legislative council, which is the research and bill drafting arm, and the legislative fiscal analyst who cooks up the governor's numbers and tells us what they really mean. And I think the people of Montana are really well served by the caliber of people who work at lower salaries than they could command in other states for our legislative branch. If we look at if we try to figure out what's going to happen here in 1993, I think basically we had the two best candidates for governor pitted against each other in the 1992 election, and at any time in Montana history since 1920. I think, tried to think of exception to that careening generalization, but I think basically you have to go back 72 years in Montana to find a set of candidates who were, people in Montana, it's the first time in 70 years had that vote for the lesser of two evils when you run for governor. And people made up their minds on the strengths or the weaknesses they perceived of the two candidates, and not just voting for one because he wasn't the other person. So I think that Montana is going to have the strongest and I hope the most effective gubernatorial leadership in the next legislative session that it's had at any time since I've been involved in the legislature, which is not hard since we haven't had any in the last 10 years. I mean that, none, absolutely none. I think my biggest disappointment with the whole legislative process since I've been involved in it in 1985 is the failure, even the refusal of the governor to work closely with the legislature. When I first got there in 1985, why the House Democratic Caucus summoned Governor Stevens down to a caucus meeting, wanted him to explain why he wanted to lower the coal severance tax. I mean, that was our party platform, said 30% coal severance tax, and he proposed lowering it. We called him down there. Well, he came in and he was angry. He said he didn't want to be there. He said he didn't think he had to explain himself to us, we're the Democratic legislators. Said he wasn't going to come back, and he never did. And that was the state of gubernatorial legislative relations under the Schwindon administration. And Governor Stevens might as well have stayed in the Bahamas for the last 4 years for all the leadership that he's provided the legislature. So I'm looking forward at least to a much more cooperative and therefore I think constructive legislative agenda in the next session of the legislature than at any time since I've been involved in it since the mid-'80s. I'll quit there and respond to questions.
Having the legislative council draft all the bills to get them into the right form seems a little inefficient in view of the 90-day session. Has there ever been any consideration of advanced preparation of bills in the proper format so that not so much work has to go on?
Well, it's not as bad as it sounds because a lot of bills, an awful lot of bills have been introduced before. And they're on the computer. A few buttons and there it is. Bring it right up. Let's try it again this year. I mean, there are bills that we introduce every session to tax-paying corporations or regulate lobbyists. I mean, they're right there. And the legislative, this is probably the most sophisticated computer network in the state of Montana. It's tied into Nexus and Lexus and all of these things, and it has access to other states' legislative records, and so it can draw these things up on the computer. And most people, when they submit a bill drafting request, they have examples, tack on examples with it, or documentation, or they say specifically what they want, and so forth. So I would say most bills knock them out in no time at all. Can I tell one story about lobbying, since that's what we're supposed to be here for? John Toole told me this story. John Toole served, former mayor of Missoula, served one term in the legislature in 1953. I mean, that is 19th century history. That's back when it was still controlled by the Anaconda Company that, moved its legal forces up to the 6th floor of the Placer Hotel, and that's where the legislature's nerve center was. Well, John had a bill to raise the salaries of county commissioners in urban counties where they work. Or at least they come to work every day. They don't in those rural counties. So he took this bill into the House General Government Committee, Local Government Committee, and he said every single member of that committee was wearing a great big cowboy hat and had his cowboy boots on the table. Every single member. He says he presented his bill. There were absolutely no questions. Nobody took their hat off. He said, and before he'd gotten out of the door, they killed him. Before he'd gotten out of the door. But then he says, Representative of the Montana Power come up, hand him another bill just prepared. He said, John, you asked for a little too much, too soon. Why don't you introduce this one? At a little more modest increase, introduce sail right through. And right now, you can introduce and request an unlimited number of bills before the session starts.
Right.
I mean, I could put in 100 bill drafting requests. The most bills I've ever seen a single legislator carry is about 27. The least is none. I mean, I don't know why they ran. The average is about 10. But after the session starts, then we have been putting a limit on the number of bill draft requests you can make at 5.
We didn't say anything about what can happen to a bill in a committee. It could be tabled, and Earl mentioned there could be a do not pass motion that succeeds. And there's other things like it comes out onto the floor in an adverse committee report, and then it can be voted up or down. The sponsor usually gets up and makes a motion to object to the adverse committee report, and then if you go along with the adverse committee report, the bill is dead. But it's not over till it's over. And if it's a good idea that can be amended into another bill, bills have to, in the Montana legislature, have that can't go out of the scope of the title of the bill. So you can't put an amendment on about highways onto a fish and game bill. And there's another thing, it can be tabled in the committee, and then the sponsor, if that sponsor's in the committee or it gets somebody, they can try to bring it up off of the table over and over again to see if it could ever get enough votes to pass. If that sponsor's been working that committee, they can maybe turn a couple of votes and get it to pass and get out on the House floor. But every step of the way of the process, there's a chance for the bill to die or to be resurrected.
Again, I want to thank our wonderful speakers and our co-sponsors, the Mansfield Library and the Missoula Public Library. And I want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate having you, and I hope you can make a difference in this next legislative session. Enjoy the football game.
There's a major event in my district. I better go to it.
My name is Cindy Maury. I'm with Montana People's Action. We will be introducing some bills on good cause eviction for protection for mobile home court residents. We will also be introducing bills on rules and regulations for residents in mobile home courts and long-term leases. If you can help us in here before we go to Helena or when we get to Helena, please call us at Montana People's Action office. Phone number is 728-5297. The legislation we will be introducing will be for mobile home court residents.
My name is Bruce Hightower. I'm with Montana People's Action. We are promoting good cause eviction legislation this year at the upcoming session of the legislature, and this bill will protect mobile home court residents by providing a good reason for mobile home court residents to be evicted. We feel this is essential to create an environment in mobile home courts where we can solve some of the problems that are occurring, that will basically protect citizens of the state of Montana from unjust eviction. We would like to solicit your help if you're interested in this issue. If you would like to participate with us in promoting this legislation, please call Montana People's Action at 728-5297. We're looking for people who are interested in helping prior to the legislative session and during the legislative session as well.
Hi, my name is Mike Johnston. I'm with Montana Community Labor Alliance. We're a new progressive coalition of nonprofit community groups and labor groups that are working together right now to form a broad progressive movement across the state of Montana. Some of the groups involved in the coalition already are Montana People's Action, Montana Federation of Teachers, Native Action, the Carpenters Union, the Coalition of Montanans Concerned with Disabilities, the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union. And we're just getting the ball rolling on this. What we're focusing on right now are ways that we can help each other out with our own individual campaigns and the opportunities to get more people involved, educate them, get them involved at the grassroots level. So if you'd like some more information on this, you can contact me at 549-1163.
Hi, my name is Andy Gardner, and I'm from Montana People's Action, and I presently chair the Missoula Area Healthcare Task Force, also work on the state board. And I was asked to talk a little bit about our healthcare legislation, healthcare campaign we're having statewide. What we're doing is working on some legislation to take the 93 legislative session that regard insurance reform in Montana. Two insurance reforms that we're working on presently are community rating and continuity of coverage. Community rating is a change in the way insurance companies rate this or charge premiums for the coverage, and it will eliminate the dip using such things as whether you're a childbearing age or have used your benefits of them charging higher rates. It's a rate stabilization method. Continuity coverage is a basic elimination of pre-existing conditions, and it will allow people that want to change jobs, go from one insurance policy to the other, a public plan to a private plan, to be able to get coverage even though they've used their coverage in the past. We encourage people to contact us. We encourage people to help. These are good reforms. These are things that will affect a lot of different people. And if you for more information, just call Montana People's Action at 728-5297.
My name is Michael Regner, and I'm with the Coalition of Montanans Concerned with Disabilities, and we're working on sort of 3 agenda items for the next year or 2, some of which will be coming up at this session of the legislature. Number 1, we're working pretty closely with Montana People's Action on the health care reform measures that they're trying to get through the legislature this session. Those having to do with community rating and continuity of coverage. And so we're endorsing those measures and working on them and trying to get some education out to the general public to help the people in Montana know how these changes are going to benefit them and how to indicate to their legislators that they want them to vote for these changes. We're also working on, probably in terms of appropriations, trying to get increased funding for the independent living centers in Montana so that they can begin to do their jobs more effectively and have more people on staff to cover these huge territories that they're covering right now. And the third thing that we're working toward, which is a continual goal, is implementation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, both at the local and the statewide level, to make sure that there are some bodies that are set up at the statewide level to ensure accessibility and various kinds of things like that. So those are primarily what we're involved in right now. Yeah, you can contact me at Summit Independent Living Center, 728-1630 if you have questions about any of the independent living or ADA issues, or you can contact me at 728-8220, and we can give you more information. And if you're interested in joining the coalition, by all means get in contact with me and we'll get you some application forms out and that sort of thing.
Somebody probably.
Yeah.